Okay, hello everybody and welcome back. We have a fabulous, simple little setup here today with three fall apples straight from the apple tree. You know, I love the variety of sizes that you get with something natural like that, different colors. They're just so adorable. Look at this one, so tiny. Oh my gosh, look at how cute that is. So I love the naturalness of these apples. You cannot find that in the grocery store for some reason. I don't know why they think we want everything to be uniform. So let's dive in and get started here. Just to let everybody know, in an 8x10 panel like this, I usually use a size 2, 4, 6 variety of brushes in my Silver Grand Prix. And I don't use mineral spirits. I have toned this with the amber, a new color, amber ochre, golden ochre from Norma Schminke Professional Paints. And I tone that using the Old Masters Merge. You can use Liquin or something else if you don't have that. And I just use a paper towel just to kind of wipe it down matte. So then let's get started here. I just really like that little golden tone. That's so pretty. So this is an eye level setup. I do want to, I have, limited subject matter. So in this case with eye level or shelf top still life, I want to have more sky, less land. I do want to utilize this table edge here. So I want to make sure that I leave enough room here for the table edge. Especially because I'm going to have like a leaf coming over the edge, and that will help add a little more dimension. So I'm going to go ahead and throw in like some shadow underneath here with the burnt umber. Most of the time I use burnt umber. If I want like a nice cool gray for some reason, I might put out raw umber. It's more of a neutral color, but 9 times out of 10 I use a burnt umber because it's nice and rich and warm. So I want to kind of figure out, where are these 3 little apples going to go? So we have the 3 apples, but then we also have some leaves coming in off stage that are all in shadow over here. I think that's going to be fun. I love that this whole apple here is in shadow. And then we get our first kind of leaf coming into light in between these 2 apples with the little foreshortened stem coming over the edge. And then I love how they have different angles. So this one is going this way, more in profile. And this one is tilting this way towards the last apple. And I like how this one is in a totally different orientation. So meaning, now we're seeing the bottom side of the apple. This one we're seeing the stem. This one's more in profile. This one's more in 3/4 view. And then this one is, we're seeing the underside sort of in a 3/4 view the other way. So when you have a simple subject like that, it's nice to, of course, find some variety in how you set them up so that there's a nice feeling of movement and some good variety. Yeah. So, and you want to do that with like flowers too. You don't want to have all the flowers looking at you sort of in the same direction. And as a good rule of thumb, I try to stay away from anything like a flower or apple basically staring right at me. So in other words, like having the center of the apple facing towards me and right in the center. It's nice to have things sort of in 3/4 view or profile, very similar to painting a portrait actually. So the other thing I want to keep in mind is with rounded objects like this, to get them grounded, I want to ground them with some cast shadow underneath. And they're going to appear to be flatter on the bottom and rounder on top. And then I want to look for any cast shadows where one apple is like here, this apple's casting a shadow onto the next. We have cast shadow underneath. That's going to give the illusion of that flat line flattening out. And then how do all these darks connect up? I want to connect all of these apples, you know, somehow together. And one way to do that, of course, they're touching, but one way to do that is to connect the darks all together. Make all the shadow kind of go together here. And then this is a lit edge, so I want to kind of wipe away some of that outline. Be careful, you know, starting too much with an outline. You don't want to end up with like a that dark paint on the lit edge can really muddy up your light. So kind of take a paper towel and just get rid of that drawing for now. I can always bring it back later. I see that happen a lot where artists paint up to that outline and then they have an outline around their object, which does not make the object look lit up. And especially you don't want to have that burnt umber dulling down whatever color you put there. So what color to go with in the background? I mean, there's so many different ways we could go here. We could go with a rich, warm, you know, kind of a darker tone of this, like a darker warm. You could go for a green. You could go for a blue or blue-gray. You know, there's a lot of different colors that would be harmonious with these apples. The primary thing is choosing something that complements the apples or helps set the apples off more and isn't as saturated in color. So I'm going to go for black and some cad yellow deep, and then a little flavor more of the blue. I'm using a Prussian or phthalo blue. Either one of those would work. Just to give it a little touch more green. So I like to start with a color that is, you know, if I'm not 100% committed to it, that it's neutral enough that I can make it more colorful as I work the painting. You know, that it would be pretty simple to change it, let's say. You know, if you wanted to do something a little more kind of cooler and more of a gray, you would add a little bit of black and white into that, you know, to get like a cooler version. So some people really tend to favor cool tones, some people favor warmer tones. You know, and of course you want to kind of experiment and play with both. So as a fun experiment, it would be, you know, neat to do the same subject, do any same subject with two different kinds of background and see which one you like the best. Now I want to pull this background color up. It doesn't have to be super thick all over, but I do want to have enough of it up around my objects, around the contour of these objects. Okay. While I'm putting in background material, I consider this foreground, the table edge, to really be background material. In other words, it's there to be seen a little bit, but really the apples are the star of the show. So I can start putting in some cad red light and cadmium yellow deep, and then to neutralize that, maybe a little touch of blue or black to kind of take it a little bit darker and neutral. So this is a warmer color than what I have in the background, but the value is very, very similar. So with your background colors or tabletop colors, you want them to be, and even shadow colors, you want them to be somewhat related, so that then the thing that's different, let's say for example the light, stands out a little bit more. Okay, and then I kind of want to get a tabletop version of that color. You know, something a little lighter in value, but I don't want to go too rich in color yet. And as you can see, I'm painting over where things are going to go. So even though there's a leaf there, I'm painting right over that because I know it's going to be a heck of a lot easier for me to paint the leaf on top rather than, you know, trying to work around the leaf. And then I'm just seeing over here, maybe go ahead and paint over where these leaves are going to go as well. So in the beginning, it's nice for me to get an idea when I'm doing my size and placement of where, you know, how much space are those elements going to take up so that I don't make things too large, perhaps. But then, because I know what's going to work better with oil paint, I will make sure that I paint right over those in some cases because it's just going to be an easier painting process. And then of course, whenever I'm ready to go into other colors, I'll just take my paper towel and really wipe the paint off the brush, pulling any paint out. So even though there's paint in here, it is dry. It's not super wet and runny. So now let's start getting on some of these beautiful reds. This red in shadow over here is our darkest red apple. And so I'm going to use some alizarin crimson with that cab red light to get it a little bit deeper. And then, even though it's mostly in shadow, it's still getting, you know, like a faint hint of light to it. So there is a darker part of this apple and a lighter part of this apple. So I do want to have a little bit of white paint in there. And of course we can use that background color green to desaturate, or you can use umber, burnt umber, you know, to desaturate, or black as well. So to get the shadow version, I'm going to do some ivory black, some alizarin crimson, and a small touch of that cad red. Just because black and alizarin crimson goes really, really dark. And this part of shadow on this apple, side of it, is still a little bit lighter and getting a little bit more light than, say, the darkest dark of the cast shadow underneath. So for that darkest dark of cast shadow underneath, I could definitely go for, you know, the ivory black and alizarin crimson. That's pretty much the darkest dark that I can get with this palette. And then there's a little bit of that, little sliver of that in between these two apples. One thing I want to be conscientious of is, you know, really being sensitive to the gesture of this middle apple. I think it's super important. So if with the drawing, if the drawing feels a little stiff, or maybe doesn't feel like it has enough movement to it or angle to it, then this would be the time for me to really try to observe that. So I'm going to use some cad red light with a little bit of white, and then we do have some more of these deeper red tones on this apple as well, sort of a two-toned apple. I want to make bold brush strokes. Even as I'm laying in this color, I want to make some nice bold brush strokes. Now, if I want to lighten it up but not go too pink, I'll grab some of that cad yellow deep to keep a little bit of heat into the color. And of course we have a whole like yellow section, but first I think I'm just going to take some cad red light, just paint this straight in here just to get the color on, refining this shadow shape that I've got going on here. And then this shadow shape is a little bit lighter perhaps than the one on the far left. So I'm going to really look for the curve of the apple, and I really want to think through what is what part of this form is in shadow, what part is in light. especially with these two-toned objects, when you start to maybe see how that yellow crosses over into the shadow, you want to think about it as it's yellow in shadow, not yellow in light. Now that I'm in the center here, I might use a little bit of blue and white to get a nice cool highlight. Here, get that started. It's better to go bold, especially in the beginning, and then we can modify and gradate the light a little more gently. Now, I do have this beautiful sort of gray-green color in the background, and that's such a perfect color for muting this red. So we have a little dip in here where I call it the navel, kind of like the belly button of the apple. And so that also, there's a little bit of shadow in there, and then the light cups on the opposite side here. Let's go ahead and get in the red before I do the yellow and all of that. Let's get in some red on this final apple. Just do like some red and Naples yellow. Naples yellow is a great color to use with red when you need to raise the value, and you do want to cool it off, but you don't want it to go pink. Now this one really needs a little modification of the shape. Make sure you're using enough paint, and especially on the most lit part, you want to make sure that you are, wiping in between strokes, especially as I come over here, I'm layering some of that cadmium red over on top of the shadow color. And when I'm doing that, I'm kind of picking up some of that shadow color as I'm doing that. So I have to be aware that I'm doing that. And then if I know I'm about to go to, say, the lights, I'll know that I need to, rinse off not really rinse off my brush because I don't use mineral spirits, but dry off my brush with the paper towel, just removing any of the umber. I do apologize. I am suffering from some allergies here, big time. And so I know I'm a little nasally and sniffy. I'm so sorry about that. That's never pleasant to listen to. Okay. Vary your brush strokes. I kind of fill in the shape, but then I want to model the form, perhaps with shorter, thicker strokes. This one going back in space, back in space, back in space. The last thing you want to do is treat your forms like you just colored in the contour and you colored in the lines, right? That looks flat, and you're not really being very sensitive to what's happening, what's happening in the 3 dimensions of reality here. So this starting edge, I want that to be nice and crisp. Pull that up. I've got this little bit of green in here because, again, on this part of the form, that's the other side of that belly button, right? So this is going to cut in away from the light. I want to look for a shape there. Nice strong shape. Again, that background green can really help neutralize. You can also go to shadow color here, and then that really kind of frames out where the green part is of that apple. Thinking about the planes of the object, changing the direction of the brush stroke. Now down here, as we get closer to the shadow, this is an area where that value is going to start to drop and move into the shadow. Okay, so now we need to start to get a little bit of highlight on this one, on the top. our light is coming from above. And then I want to kind of build up a little more paint, a little more light around that highlight. And then light is also catching down here a little bit of highlight on the other side of the apple. So on the other side of that belly button, we're going to get a little bit of light down here as well. The very back edge here is sort of the darkest edge, furthest away from the light source. It's sort of the darkest edge even within the shadow. And then going back to my black and alizarin to really ground this down. Pretty much any part of the form that is getting closer and closer to that cast shadow is going to get a little bit darker. Grounding this all down. The cast shadow a little bit deeper and darker just right underneath. And then coming back to this apple, we need some of that yellow stuff in there. So I'm just going to use some straight up Naples yellow to start to pull that in on top. And it's kind of nice if some of that underneath red kind of shows through, painting wet into wet. And then some of that yellow shows up on the other side, maybe just a little more neutral. So I might use some of that tabletop color on this other side. If there are like stripes or a pattern, you definitely want to go with some sort of pattern instead of just, you know, blurring it or blending it too much. So kind of try to figure out, is there a pattern, or can I create a stronger pattern on this apple than what I'm seeing? You know, can I just organize the information a little bit more, perhaps? This one's pretty clear on this apple. I have had some where, you know, it looks just like it's stripy all over and very kind of subtle stripes. So in that case, you kind of, the danger there is that you end up with an orange apple. I don't know if you can picture the kind of apple I'm talking about, but I know we've all seen them. So maybe a little more yellow here. And then how does that tie in with the highlight? And if you need to reshape any of those stripes, you can come back in with color next to it and kind of reshape anything. I often will adjust things in order to get more illusion of form. So this part of the form, brushstrokes moving this way with that side of the contour. And then this part of the form, brushstrokes moving the opposite way. I want to reposition this highlight, so I'm just going to paint right over it rather than trying to paint around it, which never works. And then replace that highlight. Highlights, if they have a tail, again, you want to make those go with the form. And then, oh, I forgot to get out my palette knife, darn it. Okay. And then the stem, this would work a little bit better with a palette knife, but I can use a brush as well to get some light on the stem. There's quite a bit of red and orange in there, but also kind of a cooler color too. So now just going in for finishing touches, right? What are the finishing touches that are going to make this painting get to the finish line fastest once I get all of the basic stuff in? So what it is of course like these leaves or twigs or like stems, reflected lights, things like that. So if I stay too long in this middle, let's say this middle level of working, the danger is I never get to the finish. These kind of got squished together, so I'm going to kind of move this one over a little bit further. Okay, so we have to work diligently, or maybe not even diligently, but kind of shoot to the finish as soon as we can, as soon as we're able to. So we've got this beautiful leaf overlapping. I know that leaves have to have a hard edge, hard enough edge, and this leaf in particular brings in a lot of look of finish to the painting. It's also bringing in a neutral, somewhat more neutral light, even though there's some green in here. The leaf is laying flat on the tabletop plane, so here it's overlapping. I want to make sure that there's enough of a hard edge there to overlap in front of the apple. And you kind of have to start your shapes off a little more basic and then get more subtle as you go. And I think the problem that most people have is that they are uncomfortable with those basic, simple, like cutout shapes. They want things to look really, really pretty and refined right away. But it's really these simple flat shapes that make the painting stand out and read better. So it's super important that we, start with those. Then we have a little bit of that vein here, a little bit lighter. And then perhaps this. You also have to think about what part of the leaf is catching more light than another part of the leaf. So this is kind of curling up, catching more light than, say, even this part of the leaf here. On the left-hand side, it's slightly bent a little bit, so. And then this stem here is coming like right out straight in front of us, very foreshortened, to get more dimension here, popping in the shadow, cast shadow color on the opposite side, and then cast shadow onto the front of the table edge here, maybe with some burnt umber and alizarin crimson as well. Want to keep this edge nice and sharp. And then the other one is over here. So I could, use a paper towel or pull off with my brush to remove some paint here from the background. Since this is, half of this leaf is really a light shape. I also feel like let's give this paint quality a little more vitality here before we move on. It's amazing how trying to get the drawing or a shape that the paint quality loses its intent, sort of its liveliness or life quality. Okay, and then coming over here, we've got one side of the leaf that we're seeing. Let's see, where is this showing up? Like here. We're seeing a nice, beautiful, rich green. This is the power of not over mixing your colors on, like you're making pancake batter or something, is that you get little, sort of striations of color on the canvas, which is so much more interesting. And then we have the curling up side of the leaf, which goes quite cooler, more of that Naples yellow. and that is going to cut over. And you want to think about movement, right? So these leaves really bring in a lot of beautiful movement.